You sit up slowly, breath fogging in the cold air. And before we sink any deeper into this frozen little nightmare, let me just say this. If you're new here, welcome to Hidden History Unlocked. This is the place for people who like their stories quiet, strange, and just a little haunted around the edges. If that sounds like you, feel free to follow so you can find your way back here later. And if you want to help this tiny channel survive the algorithm blizzard, tapping subscribe is the warmest gesture you could give. No pressure. Just stay if you like the feeling. All right, pull the blanket closer. The frost is deepening and the past is waiting. Tonight we begin with the strangest kind of disaster, the slow one. The kind that doesn't arrive with thunder, but with frost. A whisper of cold that becomes a sentence of hunger. You're living in the Middle Ages and the world's thermostat has just broken. The rivers turn to glass, the harvests fail, and kings start blaming witches for bad weather. Now settle in. Let the weight of the day slide off your shoulders as we drift together into the quieter corners of the past. You open your eyes to a world wrapped in silence, the kind that makes your ears hum, a hush so deep it feels like the earth itself is pausing to breathe. Frost clings to the edges of the windows, white and delicate. The air is so sharp you can almost taste it. You tug the blanket tighter, but it's the kind of cold that ignores fabric, slipping straight through to your bones, and then into your thoughts. The fire has died again. You meant to feed it during the night, but sleep won that battle. Now only pale ashes remain, soft as petals, and the hearth looks as if winter itself reached in and laid a hand across it. You push yourself upright, your breath blooming white in the cold, and try to imagine the day ahead. Somewhere past the door, the roosters should be announcing the morning, but they're silent. Maybe even they're questioning their deal with this world today. You step outside, and it strikes you immediately. The crisp crunch beneath your feet, the thin ribbon of smoke drifting from far-off chimneys, and the frozen landscape waiting still and perfect, like a painting that never finished drying. Frost grips every leaf, every thatched rooftop, every bucket someone forgot outside overnight. Even the dog seems bewildered, lifting his paws high as if the ground has turned to glass. Down the lane, your breath drifts into the mist, mingling with the villagers. Everyone bundled tight, everyone acting like nothing is unusual. Frost itself isn't strange, but this feels wrong somehow. The sun is up there behind the haze, pale and hesitant, as if unsure of its own strength. Someone mutters it might be a sign. Someone else insists it's just weather. You nod politely, even though neither explanation feels true. Beyond the village, the fields lie coated in a hard white rime. The ground is far too hard to dig, but old Brenner is already out there, shovel in hand, striking the frozen earth as if it might eventually apologize. You watch him until he finally gives up, standing there for a moment before trudging back toward the cottages, the shovel dragging behind him like a quiet confession. Back inside, the bread is stale. The butter is hard enough to crack a tooth. You eat it anyway. Word drifts through the tavern that the frost came early this year, that this winter might stretch on longer than it should. You've survived harsh winters before, but this one feels different, less like a season and more like a sentence. Still, the ale is cheap and warm, and someone launches into a story about the year the river froze solid. You laugh along, though your hands never quite relax. By nightfall, the cold only drills deeper. It slips up the walls, through the cracks, and into your dreams. Sometimes you wake to the wind leaning hard against the shutters, whispering sounds that don't quite belong to the wind at all. There's a trace of salt and iron in the air, as if the sea itself had wandered inland just to peek around. And then the animals begin to act strangely. The hens lay fewer eggs and the cow's milk turns thin. The cat, usually smug about everything, now curls at your feet, eyes fixed on the door, tail flicking in slow, uneasy sweeps. You've started sleeping with your boots on, not because you're scared, but because they're the warmest thing you own. The days drag on. The frost refuses to loosen its grip. Even when the sun manages to break through, its light feels wrong. Too sharp, too fragile. Children trace shapes in the ice forming on the well bucket, but even their laughter has thinned. You try not to dwell on the grain stores, on how much remains, on how long it all has to last. You try not to notice the hollowing cheeks around town, the shrinking smiles, the silence of dogs who no longer bother to bark at night. And then one morning, you wake to find the frost has crept inside. A white film on the window, on the table, even on the corner of your blanket. You breathe out, watch the mist linger, and realize the world isn't warming back up. It's settling in. There's a moment before dawn when the horizon glows faintly pink, and for a heartbeat, you think maybe it's ending the frost, the stillness, the silence. But the sun rises weak, tired, like it's carrying the same dread you are. You step outside again, breath sharp and alive, and look at the world turned crystal. It's beautiful in a cruel sort of way. The kind of beauty that makes you nervous because it doesn't feel temporary. The frost isn't visiting, it's moving in. You watch the sun fade behind a curtain of clouds that never seem to lift. At first, it's just a few dim mornings in a row, the kind that make you light the candles early and grumble about the damp. But by the second week, the light feels thinner, like it's been watered down. Shadows blur and noon looks like evening. You start to forget what color the sky used to be. The elders say it's smoke from distant fires or mist from the northern seas. Someone else insists it's God pulling a blanket over the world to hide something he's ashamed of. Whatever it is, the light never comes back the same way twice. Some days it's a sickly yellow, others a soft gray that makes everything look carved out of soap. You keep catching yourself staring upward, waiting for the clouds to part, but they never do. Your chores go slower now. Without the sun, you can't tell the hours. You measure the day by the toll of the church bell, which rings late and crooked. Even the birds seem uncertain. They circle, call once, then vanish into the fog, like thoughts you can't finish. The fields stay wet, the hay molds, and the sheep huddle together with expressions that can only be described as existential. People start lighting more fires indoors. The whole village smells of smoke and wet wool. The tavern feels smaller each night, packed with bodies and breath. Everyone speaks a little louder to fill the gray silence pressing from outside. Someone tells a story about a lake in Germany that froze solid even before winter came. Another swears the sun used to rise earlier when he was a boy, though he's only 30. You nod, pretending to remember warmth that feels like fiction. Food tastes different now. The bread is heavier, the milk sour quicker, and everything seems to smell faintly of damp clay. You keep a candle burning while you eat, not for the light, but to remind yourself that flame still exists. Sometimes when the wick flickers low, you feel the same way. Children draw faces on the windows with soot, just to have something looking back. They call the gray sky the lid, and it fits. The air feels trapped close, like the whole world's inside a pot that someone forgot on the fire. A few villagers say it's volcanic ash from faraway lands. You don't know what a volcano is, but you decide you don't like the sound of it. By late autumn, moss starts growing on things it shouldn't. Barn doors, rooftops, even the north sides of people's faces when they forget to shave. The damp eats into everything. Clothes won't dry, boots rot from the soles up, and laughter feels like something that has to be pried loose. Yet somehow there's humor in the misery. You hear someone joke that God must have misplaced the sun and is too embarrassed to ask where he left it. Nights stretch long and shapeless. You dream in grays and wake, unsure if you've slept. The candles burn quicker now, as though the darkness itself is hungrier. You stop counting days because they all look the same anyway. Time becomes something you wear rather than measure, heavy, damp, clinging to your shoulders. Then one morning, you think you see a faint blush behind the clouds, a ghost of dawn. You stop in the street, staring upward while your breath curls in front of you. The villagers notice too. Heads tilt, work pauses, even the dogs go still. For a moment, it feels like the world is remembering itself. But just as quickly as it appeared, the color fades. The lid settles back down. You walk home in the half-light, boots squelching through the muck, the gray pressing closer with every step. The air smells of soot and earth and something else you can't name. You tell yourself it's only weather. You tell yourself the sun is still up there somewhere waiting. But when you look at your hands, they're pale and cold, and you wonder how long a person can go on, pretending daylight is still a thing. The soil's gone stubborn. You kneel in it, hands raw from the spade, and it just stares back at you like you've asked it for a favor it doesn't owe. You press your fingers into the dirt, dark and damp, but lifeless, and wonder what you did wrong this time. Maybe the seeds were bad. Maybe the frost killed something deep below. Or maybe the world's just tired of feeding you. The fields used to hum in summer, alive with bees and wind and the small, hopeful noises of things that grow. Now they sit quiet, gray-green, the color of boiled cabbage and disappointment. You plant anyway because that's what you've always done. You whisper to the soil the way your father did, small promises, half prayers, but the ground doesn't listen. Days pass, then weeks. Nothing breaks the surface except your own doubt. By midsummer, it's clear this isn't a fluke. The neighbors start comparing failures like some grim and competition. Brenner's barley won't sprout. Marta's turnips turn to mush. And even the monastery's gardens, usually smug with abundance, look like they've been cursed. The monks, for once, stop bragging about divine favor. They look at the sky a lot now, as if God's handwriting might still be legible up there. You start rationing early, though no one admits it out loud. There's a certain shame to eating smaller portions, as though hunger itself is proof of weakness. The bread loaves shrink, the beer gets thinner, and by the end of the month, you find yourself missing the sound of chewing. You learn to appreciate the illusion of fullness, the way a warm drink can trick the stomach into silence. Every morning you walk out to the fields anyway. Habits are stubborn things. You prod the soil, nudge a clump here and there, and convince yourself that maybe something's stirring underneath. You find a worm once, pale and desperate looking, and feel unreasonably hopeful about it. You don't mention it to anyone. It feels too personal, too fragile. The church bells ring more often now. People pray longer, louder, but their eyes are restless. The priest preaches patience and faith, though he's thinner too. You watch him break the communion bread and hesitate before eating his piece. Faith is easier to swallow when you're not starving. By early autumn, the animals start pacing. The cows' ribs show through their hides. The hens stop laying, and even the mice seem leaner. You start seeing shapes in the fog over the fields. Rows of ghosts bent low, digging with invisible hands. It's probably just exhaustion, but you don't linger to check. The air smells different now, not of soil or growth, but of rot and still water. The river runs sluggish, full of silt. When you draw a bucket, the water looks cloudy, like the land bleeding out slowly. You think about drinking less. You drink more anyway. Conversations turn quieter. People speak in half sentences as if finishing them might make things too real. The jokes grow sharper, the laughter shorter. Someone says this must be the end times, and no one argues. You'd laugh if your lips weren't cracked. One morning you wake to find the field glazed in frost early again. The crops that never grew now lie glittering and dead, perfect in their failure. The sun rises dull, gives a pale nod of light, and disappears behind the gray before you can even curse it. You stand there a long time, staring at the frozen furrows until your feet go numb. You can't remember the last time you felt truly warm. When you finally turn back toward the village, you notice the smoke from the chimneys is thinner. People are burning less wood now, saving it for when the cold deepens. You think about how strange it is, how even the smallest comforts become luxuries when the world decides to stop cooperating. You reach your door, dirt still under your nails, and tell yourself, tomorrow you'll try again. Maybe the next plot will take place. Maybe the frost will lift. Maybe the earth will forgive you. But when you close your eyes that night, you dream not of fields, but of endless gray soil stretching out to the horizon, silent and still, waiting for someone else to believe in it. Everyone's hungry, but no one says the word. The word has weight, superstition, sharp edges. Saying it out loud would make it real. Things are harder to ignore. So people talk about it in softer phrases. A thin season, a bad harvest, a testing from God. You all pretend you still believe those are different things. The village smells of smoke now, not the cozy kind that means hearth and supper, but the acrid tang of burning scraps. People burn old furniture, dried weeds, even dung if it's been left long enough to harden. The air never clears. A gray haze hangs low over the thatched roofs, swallowing the sound of voices until everyone seems to speak in whispers. You pass Brenner's house and catch a glimpse of him stirring something over his fire. Too thin to be stew, too dark to be tea. His wife waves you away before you can look closer. Everyone's private now, guarded. You used to share what you had with neighbors, but that was when there was something to share. Now you hoard crumbs like secrets. At night, the tavern still opens, but it's quieter than church. The mugs are half filled with something vaguely beer-like, bitter and weak. Someone laughs too loud once, and the sound startles everyone. It's not that there's no reason to laugh, it's that laughter costs energy. Even gossip moves slower, like it's wading through mud. Whispers slip through the smoke. The miller's daughter fainted again. The baker's son hasn't been seen since last week. The priest told people to pray for warmth, but he's been sneaking down to the cellar, where rumor says he keeps a small stash of wine and something stronger. Faith can't fill a stomach, but fermented grapes still can. The children have stopped running in the lanes. They sit instead, bundled in rags, watching the adults with the solemnity of tiny judges. You catch their eyes, sometimes too old for their faces, too hollow, and look away first. The dogs have gone quiet, too. They used to bark at everything, even shadows. Now they watch the kitchens, waiting for scraps that never come. There's a kind of rhythm to hunger, you discover. The mornings are the worst when the body still remembers what full felt like. By midday, the ache dulls and turns into something manageable, almost peaceful. You get used to moving slower, thinking in shorter bursts. You start to notice the little things, the texture of the air, the way the wood cakes as it burns, the sound of your own breathing when the world outside falls silent. People still go to the market on Sundays, though no one buys much. They stand behind their stalls pretending they have things to sell, mostly for the comfort of normally. A few wilted roots, a jug of thin milk, maybe a clutch of eggs if you're lucky. Coins barely change hands anymore. They just clink politely out of habit. In the evenings, when the light fades, you sit near the hearth and watch the shadows move. You listen to the faint murmur of neighbors through thin walls, soft voices, sometimes arguments, sometimes the sound of someone crying very quietly. The sound of desperation has become background noise like wind or rain. You start dreaming about food, not feasts, but simple things. A warm loaf, butter melting down the side, the smell of apples baking. You wake with your mouth dry. The taste of ash is still there. You try to go back to sleep before the ache in your stomach reminds you what's real. Then one morning, you notice something new. A small group of villagers standing near the churchyard speaking low. You drift closer and catch fragments. 3 nights the baby didn't wake. The priest rings the bell, slow and deliberate. Everyone freezes for a moment, listening. Then life resumes the way it always does. No one says the word. Not yet. That evening, you walk through the village and smell stew again. Real stew this time, thick and rich. It comes from somewhere near the edge of the green. You follow it a few steps before stopping yourself. The smell disappears quickly into the cold, but the memory lingers. You tell yourself it must have been a dream, or maybe someone lucky enough to still have a cow. You don't ask. You don't want to know. The next day, the smoke hangs heavier than usual, low enough to sting your eyes. The whispers are quieter now, but they don't stop. You keep walking, head down, stomach hollow, pretending that the smell of burning wood isn't mixed with something else entirely. No one says the word, but everyone knows it's already here. You remember what abundance used to look like. The sight of golden fields rolling under the sun, heavy with grain, bending low like they were bowing to you. The smell of earth after rain. The warmth of bread cooling on a wooden table. Those memories used to feel ordinary. The way breathing feels ordinary until the day you realize both could be taken from you. Back then the harvest came easy. You'd wake to the chatter of sparrows, to laughter in the lanes, to the hum of scythes slicing through wheat. The whole village moved like a single creature. Men in the fields, women by the ovens, children darting between them like happy barefoot thieves. Every sound meant life. Every smell meant plenty. Now when you close your eyes, those days feel like a story someone else told you once. A nice one, but a little exaggerated. You can't imagine that much color anymore, that much noise. The fields you walk through now are brittle and sparse. Gray stalks trembling in the wind like the bones of something that used to be alive. You try to remember the last true harvest, the one before the frost, before the gray skies, before the ground stopped trusting you. It must have been years ago, though the memories are still sharp enough to hurt. The air was thick with grain, dust and laughter, and everyone's hands were blistered, but proud. You remember the sound of the cartwheels creaking under the weight of wheat, the songs the women sang while binding sheath. You remember being full, not just your stomach, but your life. You'd taken it for granted. Of course, everyone did. You complained about the long days, the ache in your back, the chafing from the tools. You'd sneak bites of roasted barley and pretend you were starving just to earn another spoonful. You had no idea you were living through the kind of plenty people would later whisper about in church, the kind of plenty that sounded sinful just to describe. Now you scrape what little there is from the soil and wonder how much longer you can fool yourself into thinking it's enough. The earth looks the same, but it's colder somehow. Hollowed out, the wind doesn't hum anymore. It hisses. Even the birds have learned to leave early, like they've seen this story before and didn't like the ending. The grain stores are nearly empty. The old mile turns slower each week, the stream running thin, as if even the waters decided to ration itself. You've learned how to make a meal out of almost nothing but boiled bark. Soup thickened with yesterday's crumbs. It's not satisfying, but it keeps you upright, which feels like victory enough. Sometimes someone brings out an old jar of preserved fruit from before the bad seasons, and it becomes a kind of ceremony. You gather close, pretending you're just sharing a meal, but it feels more like remembering a language that's dying. You eat slowly, reverently. The sweetness tastes wrong, somehow too bright, too fragile for the world you live in now. At night, you lie awake, listening to the wind drag itself across the thatch. You imagine what it would sound like if it carried the old harvest songs again, the ones you used to hum without thinking. You try to remember the words, but they slip away, replaced by the sound of your stomach twisting in the dark. The priest says there will be better years again, that the cycle will turn, that God doesn't forget his children. You nod because it's polite, but deep down you think maybe he already has, or maybe he's just busy somewhere warmer. When morning comes, you go back to the fields anyway. Habit's all that's left. You run your fingers through the dirt, still half frozen, even in sunlight, and try to picture it rich again. You tell yourself that under all this stubborn silence, something still stirs, that maybe next year the green will return, and the smell of bread will drift through the lanes once more. But as you stand there, the cold biting through your gloves, the sky gray and unpromising, you can't help but feel like the story of abundance was never quite real. Just a tale your past self told to make the present bearable. You bend to the ground, dig your hands into the soil, and whisper the old words of thanks out of habit. The earth gives nothing back, but you whisper to them anyway. Someone throws the first rock through the baker's window, and for a second, the sound doesn't even register as violence. It's sharp, quick, like the crack of ice on the river in spring. You're close enough to see the glass shatter outward. Hear the soft gasp that ripples through the crowd before the silence folds in again. No one moves, no one claims it. The stone rolls to a stop beside the door, dusted white with flour. The baker doesn't come out right away. Everyone knows he's been sleeping in the back room, guarding his loaves like treasure. He'd been selling smaller and smaller portions each week, cutting them thinner until you could see light through them. Some said he was hiding extra sacks of grain for his family. Others said he was saving them for the priest. Nobody knew which rumor they wanted to believe less. When the door finally cracks open, he stands there covered in flowers, a ghost of his former self, eyes red from sleepless nights. He doesn't yell, doesn't plead, just stares at the crowd that's grown outside his shop, faces gray with hunger, hollow with something harder to name. He tries to speak, but someone laughs high and brittle, and that's when the crowd starts moving. It's not chaos at first, it's something worse, purposeful. People push forward, calm and slow, like they're just queuing for bread the way they used to. The baker steps back, voice trembling, hands raised as if to bless them, but no one's asking for a blessing anymore. The door gives way under the pressure, and the smell of yeast and old heat pours out into the cold air like a memory of better days. You don't remember who grabs the first loaf. It happens too fast, then another, then another. The room fills with the sound of tearing paper, splintering shelves, a woman's shriek that could be laughter or sobbing. Someone slips, Someone shouts, and suddenly the quiet village you've known your whole life feels like a city under siege. You find yourself pressed against the wall, watching. You tell yourself you wouldn't take anything, not like this, but your stomach aches with the kind of hunger that makes honesty flexible. The smell alone is dizzying, fresh bread, warm and impossible. Your hands move before your mind catches up. You grab a heel of something burnt and black, clutch it like stolen fire, and run. Outside, the air is full of ash and shouting. The baker's wife stands in the street, hair undone, screaming for the crowd to stop. Someone pushes her aside, gently, almost kindly. No one looks at her long. The baker himself is gone from the doorway. Maybe he's running too. Maybe he's just watching from somewhere. Realizing that the thing he loved, the thing that made him useful, is now the reason everyone hates him. By dusk, the square looks like a battlefield. Crumbs scatter across the mud like confetti from a ruined feast. The people drift away in small groups, faces blank, each one pretending they didn't just steal from a man they've known since childhood. You see the black smoke rising from the chimney of his house later that night and hope it's just his oven. You know it's not. Word spreads by morning. A riot in one village becomes 3, then 5. Bakers board their windows. Millers hire guards. The Lord sends riders with threats about order and obedience, as if words can fill empty bellies. You hear about one town where they hanged a woman for taking a single roll. The rope probably cost more than the bread did. The church bells ring that Sunday, but the pews stay half empty. The priest's sermon sounds hollow, echoing off stone walls that smell faintly of mildew and wax. He says it's sin that drives men to steal. You think it's hunger. You wonder if God can tell the difference anymore. That night, you walk past the baker's shop. The doors were patched with rough wood, the window boarded, but the smell lingers faintly in the air. Flour, smoke, and something sweet beneath it all, like the ghost of a loaf cooling on a forgotten table. You stand there longer than you mean to, the chill biting at your hands and listening to the wind move through the cracks. Somewhere down the lane, a dog barks, then another. A shutter slams. The village exhales. You tuck what's left of your stolen crust into your coat and walk home under a sky that looks the color of soot. Tomorrow, someone else will throw another stone. Tomorrow, there might not be any windows left. You lose track of the months. At first, you try to keep count, scratching lines into the wall by the hearth, one for each week. But after a while, the days blur together. The marks start to mean nothing. The sky never changes, the cold never lifts, and time itself starts to feel frozen like everything else. You wake, you shiver, you sleep. Sometimes the sun appears for a few trembling minutes, pale as milk, then slips away again like it's embarrassed to be seen. The smell of damp straw hangs everywhere, mixed with smoke and unwashed wool. You can't remember the last time your hands felt clean. The floorboards creak with frost, and the thatch drips even when there's no thaw. Every sound seems slower in the cold, as if the air itself is too heavy to carry noise properly. The wind howls through the gaps in the door, and you stuff rags into the cracks, but it finds you anyway, patient and merciless. Your clothes have forgotten warmth, layers upon layers, yet still you feel the chill sinking in. It's not a sharp cold anymore. It's the kind that just sits there, a dull ache that becomes part of you. You move slower now. Everyone does. Conversations happen in the wan, murmurs near the fires, half-finished sentences that trail off because there's nothing new to say. Every topic leads back to the same conclusion. The weather's not turning, and no one knows why. The animals have gone quiet, too. The few that survive huddle together in the barns, eyes dull, their breath rising in little white ghosts. The cows barely give milk. The hens don't bother with eggs. You check on them each morning, not because there's hope, but because you need something to do. You talk to them sometimes, voice cracking from the cold, just to remind yourself you can still make sound. The river froze solid weeks ago, and the village children, what's left of them, skate on it, using flat bones tied to their feet. Their laughter sounds strange in this new world, thin and bright against all the gray. You watch them from a distance, part of you warmed by it. Part of you is angry that they can still find joy here. The ice is their playground. But you know it's also a warning. The water was never supposed to freeze that deep. In the evenings, the tavern stays crowded, though there's nothing to drink but weak ale and melted snow. The fire burns low to save wood, and people press close together, the air thick with sweat and smoke. Jokes have become sharper, meaner, born out of hunger, more than humor. Someone laughs too loudly at something cruel, and no one stops them. It's easier to laugh at misery than face it. You dream in cold colors now, gray, white, blue. Sometimes you dream of summer, but it feels wrong, too bright, too loud. You wake in the dark and listen to the roof grab under the weight of new snow. Once you thought snow was beautiful, now it feels like a slow burial. There are rumors of villages disappearing to the north, swallowed by ice or simply abandoned. No one knows for certain. Messengers don't travel anymore, and roads are more like trenches of frozen mud. Even the church bells sound distant, as though the cold has numbed the air itself. The priest still preaches hope, though his sermons grow shorter each week. His breath fogs as he speaks, curling upward like the last bits of faith leaving the room. You start to forget the taste of things, the sweetness of fruit, the warmth of milk, the texture of bread that wasn't stretched thin with sawdust or oats. Meals have become an act of memory rather than nourishment. You chew slowly, eyes closed, pretending it's better than it is. One morning you wake before dawn and step outside. The world is quiet, blank-eyed and white, so deep it swallows the sound of your footsteps. The air is so still, it feels like you're walking through glass. Somewhere behind you, a rooster tries to crow, but gives up halfway through. You look toward the horizon and realize you can't tell if it's dawn or dusk anymore. The sky doesn't change, the cold doesn't lift, the world just waits. You stand there until your fingers start to burn, until you can't feel your face, until you start to think, maybe this isn't a season at all. Maybe this is just how things are now, an endless winter stretching out forever, patient and unmoving, waiting for everything that breathes to tire first. The animals start falling before the people do. It happens quietly at first, almost politely. A cow that doesn't rise in the morning, a calf born too early, too small. You tell yourself it's the cold or bad luck or something that can still be fixed, but by the end of the week you can smell it before you see it. The air around the barns turns thick and sour, heavy with decay and failure. You start walking a different way to the fields, just to avoid passing by. You never realized how much noise they made until it stopped. The shifting of hooves, the rhythmic chewing that filled the evenings, all of it is gone. The silence hums in your ears now, pressing against your skull like a secret you don't want to know. When you open the barn door, it's too still. Even the rats have disappeared. You tell yourself that's a good thing, but somehow it feels worse. You used to name them, the cows, the oxmen, the goats. Each one had a face you recognized, a small habit you could read. They were stubborn, gentle, and alive. Now they're just shapes in the straw, frozen in mid-sea collapse, as if death caught them mid-thought. You start covering their bodies with what hay you can spare, not because it matters, but because it feels wrong to leave them bare to the cold. The men dig pits out beyond the fields where the ground still gives way under the shovel if you strike it long enough. It's slow work. The soils froze stiff, each strike ringing like metal on stone. The bodies pile faster than the pits can deepen. The smoke from the burnings drifts low and bitter, crawling into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You can't wash it off anymore. It clings to you like guilt. The women boil what milk is left, thin as water, and pour it into cups with hands that tremble. It tastes sour, but no one complains. The children drink it anyway, eyes closed, like they're pretending it's something better. You can see their ribs now when they bend to reach the fire. You stop looking too closely. There's talk that the sickness started in the lowlands where the floods came early. Others say it's from the cold itself, that the frost has poisoned the grass. A few whisper that it's punishment, that greed or sin has soaked into the soil, killing what feeds on it. You don't argue. Arguing takes energy, and faith feels thin when your livelihood dies on its feet. At night, you hear strange sounds from the empty stalls. The wind whistles through the cracks in the boards, imitating the soft groans that used to mean life inside. Sometimes you think you hear hooves shifting, the faint jangle of a bell, and you almost get up to check, but you know better. It's a memory pretending to be hope. By the end of the month, most of the barns stand empty. The few animals left are gaunt, their hides loose and dull. You feed them handfuls of whatever you can find, old straw, scraps of bark, even the peelings from your own table. You've started talking to them more, words you barely hear yourself say. You promise them spring, though you're not sure spring still exists. The priest comes through the village once, carrying a censer that barely smokes in the cold. He blesses the barns and mutters something about endurance. His breath fogs in front of him like a small ghost. You can tell he's afraid to look inside. After he leaves, the smell of incense lingers for a day, mixing uneasily with the stink of rot. When the last cow falls, you stay beside it until the light fades. You listen to its breathing, slow, uneven, and fragile, like the sound of fabric tearing. You place a hand on its flank, feel the faint tremor of warmth beneath the skin, and for a moment you think it might rise again, but it doesn't. You stay until the body stiffens, until even the flies are too cold to come. Later, when the snow begins to fall again, you cover the door to the barn and walk home through the whitened fields. Your footprints fill quickly behind you, erasing the path as you go. The night is quiet, too quiet, and you realize the village has become a place without sound. You glance back once, half expecting to see the herd moving again, silhouettes in the snow, but there's nothing there. Only stillness. Only the world holding its breath, waiting for the next thing to die. You count the days by how long you can stretch a single loaf. It becomes your new form of timekeeping, a slow ritual of slicing thinner and thinner, pretending it's still enough. You used to eat without thinking, tearing bread with your hands, crumbs on your shirt, laughter in your throat. Now every bite feels like negotiation. The knife hesitates, the stomach pleads, the mind lies. The year begins with rain. Endless sullen rain that turns fields to swamps and rivers to serpents. You watch it soak the earth until the soil becomes soup, swallowing the seeds before they ever think to sprout. The villagers start calling it God's washing. Though no one's sure what he's trying to clean, the sky stays gray, thick and low, pressing down until even the air tastes wet. The fields rot, the granaries empty faster than anyone admits. The few grains that survive the damp turn black with mold. You sift through them anyway, hoping the bad ones can be scraped clean. Hunger has a way of revising your standards. The bread that once smelled rich and yeasty now smells like damp wood and fear. Still, it's bread. By midsummer, the roads are full of wanderers. Farmers from neighboring villages carrying empty sacks, mothers with children who no longer cry. They come asking for work, for food, for anything. You want to help, you really do. But charity is a luxury you can't afford. You start keeping your door barred at night, not because you think they'll steal, but because you don't want to look them in the eye when you tell them no. The church tries to make sense of it. The priest says the famine is a test of faith, that suffering brings you closer to salvation. You notice he's lost weight too, though not as much as most. His sermons are shorter now. He saves his voice. When he speaks of miracles, he does so softly, as if not to wake the hunger sleeping in the pews. You learn new ways to fill your stomach with boiled nettles, bark peeled from trees, thin soups of roots and weeds. Someone claims to have caught a rat and cooked it, and no one even flinches. The jokes about hunger have stopped being jokes. There's only so much humor to be mined from emptiness. Nights are the worst. The body grows restless when there's nothing to burn for energy. You dream of food, constantly roasted meat, warm porridge, bread thick enough to bite without hesitation. You wake to the same thin air, the same hollow ache. Sometimes you chew pieces of straw just to trick your mouth into movement. By autumn, the rain finally stops, but it's too late. The fields lie drowned, and the harvest is a mockery of what it once was. A handful of grain feels like treasure. The market collapses. Money means nothing when there's nothing to buy. You start hearing about thefts from the granary, then punishments for them. The sheriff hangs one boy for stealing a loaf. He couldn't have been more than 12. No one watches. No one can bear to. The bodies start to appear quietly. An old man slumped by the road, a woman in the fields, a child asleep by a barn who doesn't wake. The bell tolls more often, but softer each time, as if even the church is weary of mourning. The smell of smoke lingers everywhere now. People burn whatever they can find. You keep your bread wrapped in cloth, hidden high on a shelf. Each morning, you unwrap it, touch it lightly, and promise yourself you'll make it last another day. You think about eating the crust and saving the center for tomorrow. Then you think about tomorrow and eat the crust anyway. Sometimes you share it with the neighbor's boy. His mother died in the spring, and he stares at food the way a drowning man stares at the surface. You tear off a corner of your loaf and hand it to him without looking. He thanks you between bites, though you both know gratitude isn't the point anymore. It's just survival passed hand to hand. Winter comes early. The ground freezes before the last of the dead are buried. You walk past the churchyard and count the new mounds until you stop bothering to count. The world feels smaller now, quieter, thinner, hollowed out like the belly of a starving man. At night, you stare at the last piece of bread left on the table. The candle flickers low, and the loaf casts a long, strange shadow on the wall. You tell yourself it'll taste sweeter tomorrow if you wait. But you don't wait. You never do. The priests keep preaching warmth. The air keeps answering with snow. You sit in the pews, breath clouding in front of you, watching your prayers drift upward like smoke that never finds the ceiling. The church used to be a place of heat. Candles burning, bodies packed tight, the low hum of shared belief. Now the candles sputter in the drafts. The benches creak with emptiness. And even God feels like he's gone quiet for the winter. The priest's voice trembles as he speaks, though not from passion. He says the cold is a test, that faith must burn brighter than fire. You look at the pale faces around you, blue-lipped and hollow-eyed, and wonder how bright a person can burn when they're running on scraps. Someone coughs in the back, a dry, echoing sound, and everyone flinches. He talks about divine mercy, but outside the snow piles against the doors like an afterthought. When the sermon ends, no one lingers. People leave with their heads down, as if afraid the sky might notice them. You follow the line of figures into the gray light, boots crunching in the frozen slush. The priest stands in the doorway, blessing each person as they pass. His hand shakes when it meets yours, thin and bird-like. You can feel the bones through his skin. He murmurs something about keeping faith, but the words sound rehearsed. You wonder if he even believes them anymore. Back home, the hearth smolders, more smoke than flame. You add the last of your wood and watch it catch reluctantly, the fire small and sullen. You used to pray before meals. Now you eat in silence, not because you've lost faith. Exactly, but because words feel expensive. The church says this suffering has purpose. You just wish you knew what it was. By midwinter, the sermons grow longer. The colder it gets, the more the priests talk about sin. They say the frost is punishment, that pride has frozen the world from within. You can't help but think it's a convenient kind of theology, one that keeps the guilt local and the blame divine. The tavern crowd laughs about it sometimes, though it's the tired kind of laughter that ends in silence. Someone says, if God wanted to punish humanity, he could have chosen something less repetitive. Someone else mutters that maybe he did. The statues in the church have started to crack. The Virgin's face is split down one cheek, a thin white line that makes her look strangely human. The candles in front of her burn lower each week, wax pooling on the altar like melted hope. Still, people come to pray. It's what they know. Faith, even wounded, is easier than nothing. You keep a small cross by your bed. It used to comfort you, but lately it feels heavier somehow, as if it's absorbed all the prayers that never got answered. You still touch it before you sleep, though you're not sure if you're asking or apologizing. Some nights, you dream of warmth, not heaven's kind, just the simple human kind, the kind that comes from a fire that doesn't need explaining. One morning you pass the priest in the square. He's thinner now, beard patchy with frost, eyes distant. He greets you kindly, but avoids meeting your gaze. You realize he's walking slower than before, as though carrying something too heavy to share. Later, you hear he stopped leading morning prayers altogether. The bell still rings, but only because someone else pulls the rope. Rumors spread that people in nearby villages have stopped going to church. Some have turned to charms, to old songs whispered in corners, to the kind of faith that predates sermons. You can't decide if that's heresy or honesty. All you know is that the snow keeps falling soft and steady, as if the sky has forgotten how to do anything else. On Sunday, you go to the church again, out of habit, not belief. The pews are half empty, the air colder inside than out. The priest doesn't talk about warmth anymore, he just reads the Psalms, voice low, eyes unfocused. You watch the snow drift through a crack in the roof and land on the altar, melting into a small, dark stain. For a moment, you think it looks like blood. You bow your head not to pray, but because it feels wrong not to. The silence afterwards stretches long and thin, filling the church until it hums. You wait for something, a sign, a sound, a flicker of warmth, but all you hear is the wind slipping through the stones. Faith doesn't shatter all at once. It just fades like a candle running out of wax. And when it finally goes dark, you almost don't notice. You trade your boots for salt. The man you give them to look at you like he's the clever one, but you're too cold and too hungry to care. He bites a grain between his teeth to prove it's real, and you nod like that means anything anymore. The salt comes wrapped in a bit of cloth, gritty and gray, and for a brief, ridiculous moment, you feel rich. You carry it home like treasure, clutching it close as though it could melt the frost and in your bones. The ground hasn't thawed in weeks. Mud should be returning by now, but the earth stays stiff and silent, as if spring got lost on its way north. Every morning you wake hoping for birdsong, but the only sound is the wind scraping against the shutters. Even the crows seem to have given up. The air smells faintly of rot and smoke, like something burned too long ago to matter. You pour the salt onto the table in a small mound. It sparkles in the dim light, almost pretty. You think about how much you used to take it for granted, how it once sat in bowls by the hearth, sprinkled over meat, stirred into stew without thought. Now it's worth more than wool, more than iron. People whisper about it like it's sacred, a gift from the sea itself. You try not to think about how far away the sea really is. Your feet ache almost immediately without the boots. The ground bites, cruel and familiar. You wrap rags around your toes, layer them with scraps of cloth, and tell it's yourself. It's fine. You're inside most of the time anyway. But when you step outside to fetch water, the cold rushes up your legs like punishment. You walk faster to hide the limp. The village looks smaller now, though you know it's not. Houses slump against the gray roofs, sagging under months of frost. You pass neighbors who used to nod and smile, but now they just glance and move on. Everyone's become an expert in pretending not to see each other's desperation. You can't help it either. Hunger makes privacy contagious. You use the salt sparingly, a pinch in the thin soup of roots and bark, a few grains pressed against your tongue when the ache gets bad. It cuts through the dullness for a moment, sharp, clean, alive. It reminds you what flavor used to feel like, what living used to taste like. You close your eyes and imagine roasted meat, butter, and warmth. Then you open them again and the fires nearly go out. At night, you dream of summer markets. Tables piled with fish glistening in the sun, barrels of salt stacked like small mountains, the air thick with the smell of brine and heat. You dream of your boots being too sturdy, dry, perfect. You wake with your feet numb and the taste of salt still in your mouth, like the sea itself came to mock you. A week later, the thaw almost begins. The air softens for a day or two, just enough to make you believe in the idea of change. The snow turns to slush and the ground sighs under your steps. You think maybe, just maybe, this is it. But the next morning, the frost is back, sharper than before, as if winter noticed your hope and decided to punish it. The man who took your boots passes you in the square. He's wearing them, of course, mud-crusted along the soles, laces tightened, neat. He smiles, not cry, but in that way people do when they've won something small and know it. You look at his feet too long and have to look away before you start to hate him for it. That night, you hold the last handful of salt in your palm, turning it over in the light. You wonder if you should sell it, trade it for a blanket or a bit of dried fish. But the thought makes your stomach twist. It feels too important, too personal, like giving away the last piece of yourself that still remembers better times. So you hide it instead, tucked in a jar, buried beneath the straw. When you lie down, your feet throb from the cold. You tell yourself it's fine, that it's worth it, that one day the frost will lift and you'll walk again without pain. But as the wind sighs through the cracks and the fire shrinks to embers, you start to wonder if the salt was ever worth the trade, or if in the end, hope is just another thing you bought too dearly. You cross what used to be a river, though it feels wrong to call it that now. The The water that once sang its way through the valleys lies still beneath your feet, hard as stone and twice as silent. It stretches out before you like a mirror that's forgotten how to reflect. The air bites, brittle and sharp, and every step sounds like a question you don't want answered. You test the ice before you move. Heel first, then toe, the way you've seen the traders do. They say the trick is to listen. Ice always tells you when it's ready to break. You've learned to trust sounds more than sight lately. Sight can lie, but sound doesn't. The ice cakes beneath you, long and low, the sound of something ancient, considering whether to let you pass. You hold your breath until it quiets again. Then you keep walking. There was a time when this river was alive. You remember the smell of wet reeds, the flicker of fish just under the surface, the shimmer of light skipping across ripples in the summer. You used to swim here. You used to complain about how cold it was. Now that memory feels like something stolen from someone else's life. Across the ice, a line of travelers moves slowly, bundled in rags and frost. They drag carts and sleds, their breath fogging in small bursts that vanish as quickly as they appear. The sound of iron runners on ice is strange, like whispers dragged across glass. You fall into step with them, silent strangers bound by the same unspoken hope that the other side holds something warmer. Halfway across, the wind shifts. It comes barreling down the river, sweeping snow across the ice in sheets that sting your face. You pull your cloak tighter, though it does little good. The world shrinks to a blur of white and motion, the horizon dissolving into nothing. You keep your eyes on the faint shapes ahead, trusting that if they don't fall through, maybe you won't either. Somewhere behind you, there's a sound like a sigh the kind of frozen thing makes right before it gives up. You don't turn around, you just walk faster. The others hear it too, their steps quickening in unison. The ice moans again, deep and hollow, the voice of the river remembering it was never meant to be. Walking on. When you finally reach the far bank, your legs are shaking, though you're not sure if it's fear or cold. The ground feels foreign beneath your feet, too solid after the shifting song of the ice. You glance back and see the river stretching endlessly behind you, pale and perfect. A road carved by the cruelty of winter. A few dark spots break the smoothness, patches where someone didn't make. You look away before your mind gives them names. The village on the other side isn't much better than the one you left. The same thatched roofs, hunched beneath snow, the same smoke curling reluctantly from chimneys. But they say there's grain here, and in times like these, rumor is enough to move entire families across frozen death traps. You pass faces as hollow as your own, eyes darting to the sack you carry, as if they can smell the crumbs inside. No one speaks. Conversation feels like a luxury of warmer times. You find a place to rest by a frozen dock, the boat stranded upright in the ice like the bones of some extinct animal. The river holds them fast, preserving them mid-motion, caught between one season and the next. You run your hand along a hull and feel the frost cling to your skin. The cold doesn't let go easily anymore. The sun tries to rise but barely manages a dull smear of light behind the clouds. You think about how it used to shimmer on this river, gold on blue, and how that light once felt infinite. Now it's just gray on gray. You can't remember what warmth feels like. Not really. You remember the idea of it, the memory of a memory, but not the thing itself. As dusk falls, you watch another group of travelers step onto the ice. Their figures blur in the distance, small and determined. You want to call out to warn them about the weak patches near the center, but your voice sticks in your throat. The wind would carry it away anyway. You just watch until they're swallowed by the white. The river lies silent beneath them, holding its breath. You wonder if it ever plans to move again, or if it's decided this is easier to stay still, to freeze, to forget the shape it once had. You can't blame it. Some things are too tired to thaw. London turns disaster into entertainment. It shouldn't surprise you anymore. This city has always been stubborn, theatrical, too alive to take a hint from nature. The Thames has frozen solid again, thick enough this time to hold not just a few brave fools, but an entire fairground. So of course, the people of London do what they do best. They set up shop on it. You step down from the embankment, boots crunching on the ice that now passes for pavement. The river, usually a black artery of movement and noise, lies still beneath your feet, a gleaming plain of white and pale blue. It's cold enough that your breath hangs in front of you like a second ghost. But you follow the sound of laughter and bells anyway, drawn toward the chaos like everyone else. It's astonishing what people will build on something that shouldn't exist. Booths, tents, and taverns sprout directly from the ice, as if London simply grew a second layer overnight. Flags flap weakly in the wind, colors bright against the frost. You pass stalls selling hot gin, pastries baked over makeshift fires, and small charms promising good fortune against the cold. Somewhere a fiddler plays a tune that tries too hard to sound cheerful. You stop at a chestnut vendor whose brazier hisses and crackles with the sound of comfort. The smell alone feels worth the price. You hand over a few coins, fingers stiff from the cold, and watch the man scoop the nuts into a paper cone, steam rising like a small miracle. He grins through a face half hidden by scarf and soot. "Good day for it, eh?" he says, voice rough but amused. You nod, because what else can you do? It's the sort of madness that passes for optimism here. The chestnuts are warm against your palms, almost painfully so, and you stand for a moment just holding them, savoring the illusion of heat. When you bite into one, the taste is earthy, sweet, alive. It feels like something from another world. A reminder that food can still taste like joy, not just survival. Around you, the crowd thickens. Children skate in uneven circles, shrieking with delight every time they fall. Couples huddle together near the gin stands, their laughter fogging the air. Merchants shout about frost fair bargains, as if anyone will remember these trinkets when the river finally melts. A man in a jester's hat juggles flaming torches, the reflection of fire dancing beneath his feet. You can almost forget for a while that this scene exists because the world broke first. That the same cold making laughter possible here has turned fields to stone and villages to graves. You look down and imagine the river's current still moving below, slow and strangled, waiting for the moment it can remind everyone who's in charge. A gust of wind sweeps through, scattering ash from the chestnut fire across the ice. The smoke smells faintly of iron. You pull your coat tighter and keep walking, weaving through the maze of stalls. Someone selling illustrated pamphlets called The Wonders of the Great Frost, complete with woodcuts of smiling skaters and fat merchants. You wonder how long it'll take before someone calls this a miracle instead of a warning. Farther on, you reach the printing stall, a small press set up right there on the ice. The printer's hands blackened with ink. He sells poems written just for the occasion, fresh from the press, the paper still warm. You buy one without reading it, tucking it into your coat. Maybe later, when your fingers stop shaking, you'll see what London has to say about its own defiance. As evening falls, the fair glows with hundreds of small fires, lanterns reflecting on the ice like stars caught beneath your feet. Musicians play louder. Now the crowd drunks, their voices rising in rough harmony. You find a place near the edge of the river where the city lights shimmer above and below. And for a brief moment, you feel suspended between two worlds, one frozen, one burning. The ice cakes faintly underfoot, a low groan that ripples through the laughter like a warning cough. No one seems to notice, or maybe no one wants to. You take another chestnut from the cone and watch the steam curl away into the dark, vanishing like everything else that ever felt certain. You tell yourself the river will hold a little longer, that the warmth from the fires will last until morning, that the laughter means something real. But even as you think it, you can hear the faint sound of water moving somewhere deep below, patient and unseen, reminding you that nothing in this city, least of all the ground beneath your feet, ever truly stays still. It starts small, the way most dangerous things do. A rumor here, a whisper there, passed along in the dark between meals that no longer fill. People need somewhere to aim their fear, and fear always finds a target. You hear it first at the market, two women bent over a barrel of turnips. Their voices are low but sharp. They say the weather isn't natural, that someone has angered God, that this kind of cold doesn't just happen. By evening, the whispers have names. Foreigners, heretics, witches, the same people who were invisible last season are suddenly everywhere in conversation. Blamed for everything from the dying crops to the frozen rivers. You know most of them, or you used to. A Flemish cloth merchant, the widow who sells candles near the church, Even the midwife, who's delivered half the village, isn't safe. The human mind doesn't like randomness. It prefers villains. The priest tries to calm things at first. He preaches that suffering brings redemption, that blame is a temptation from the devil himself. But his words come out thin, almost apologetic. It's hard to take moral instruction from a man who's visibly starving when he blesses the congregation. His hand trembles, and you can't help but notice how his ring has slipped loose around his finger. Outside, people gather around fires that do little to fight the cold. You join them one night, pretending you're there for warmth, but really you just want to listen. The talk turns ugly fast. A man insists he saw strange lights over the hills, blue and unnatural. Someone else says the moon's been watching differently lately, pale and wide as an unblinking eye. The crowd nods. You feel yourself nodding too before you catch it. The way agreement spreads like a contagion. A few days later, the first accusation lands. A woman named Alina, who lives by the riverbank, is dragged to the square because her well never froze. People claim it's witchcraft, though you remember her explaining once that her well is fed by a spring, deep and moving. Facts don't stand much of a chance these days. She protests, of course, but the crowd's already decided. They don't even need to shout. The silence of 100 watching faces is worse. You don't stay to see what happens next. You tell yourself it's because you don't want to watch cruelty, but you know the truth. It's because you don't want to see what fear turns people into. And worse, you don't want to see which side of that you're on. Afterward, the rumors multiplied. The miller's daughter has the evil eye. A merchant's imported goods carry curses. The moon is at fault too. According to one local scholar, it's moved closer, changing the tides, tilting the seasons. Someone swears the reflection in the ice looks different every night, like the sky's rearranging itself. You start to keep your head down. Words can turn against you faster than the weather. Even small kindnesses feel dangerous now. Sharing bread looks like a conspiracy. Speaking up sounds like guilt. The air in the village feels thick, heavy, not with snow, but with suspicion. You notice doors closing faster when you pass, the way neighbors avoid eye contact, the way laughter, what little is left, always happens in private now. One evening, you hear the bells again, not for worship this time. The sound drags through the air like a dull blade. You follow the crowd toward the river, the same frozen one that used to bring joy during the frost fairs. Now it's just another stage for desperation. There in the half-light stands another accused man, one of the foreign traders. He's pleading in a language you don't understand, but his fear needs no translation. The priest doesn't stop it. No one does. You walk home after, and the snow crunches beneath your boots in time with your heartbeat. The moon hangs low and swollen, brighter than it should be. You look up at it and almost laugh. It's absurd, blaming the sky. But a small part of you wonders if maybe, just maybe, the heavens really are watching. Because down here, no one else seems to be. Every gust of wind feels like an accusation. It hisses through the streets, curling under door frames and rattling shutters like it's hunting for someone to blame. You walk with your hood low, your steps quick, eyes fixed on the ground. It's safer that way. People are watching differently now, not out of kindness or curiosity, but calculation. Everyone's measuring guilt like it can be seen in the way you hold your shoulders or the speed of your breath. The air smells of smoke more often lately, not the usual wood smoke that means supper or warmth, but the dry biting kind that smells like fear turned tangible. Someone's always burning something, a charm, a letter, an unlucky neighbor's belongings. They say it's cleansing, that it keeps the devil from getting too comfortable. You've learned not to ask what else gets burned with the rest. The priest doesn't talk about mercy anymore. He talks about vigilance, about evil walking in plain sight. His sermons have turned sharp, his words slicing through the congregation like frost through the fields. He tells them that sin hides in the ordinary, that the devil's favorite disguise is familiarity. You feel the crowd absorb it, feel their relief at being told who to fear. Certainty is addictive when the world stops making sense. You stop visiting the market except when you have to. The laughter there sounds forced now, brittle as ice. You see women clutching rosaries and men carrying charms carved from rowan wood, as if superstition can be worn like armor. Someone's nailed a horseshoe to the door of the bakery. Someone else swears the widow on the hill cursed their crops just by looking at them. The rules of reason have packed up and left with the sun. One night you hear shouting outside your window. You draw back the curtain in just enough to see shapes moving in the square torches. Shadows, a circle of faces lit from below. The woman in the middle is screaming, but it's the wrong kind of scream, not for help, but disbelief. You recognize her coat. It's the midwive's, the one who brought your cousin's child into the world last spring. You remember how she smiled when she handed over the baby? How gentle her hands were? Now those same hands are bound behind her back. The next day, no one mentions it directly. They talk around it the way people talk around death. Someone mutters that she had herbs no one else did. Someone else swears they saw her talking to a crow. The priest says nothing, and his silence feels like permission. You keep your mouth shut. You have questions, but questions are dangerous currency now. The witch hunters arrive before the week is out. Strangers in dark coats, carrying scrolls and authority like weapons. They move from door to door, polite but cold, asking about omens, about dreams, about anyone who seems unusual. You learn quickly that unusual just means unlucky. When they finally reach your house, you keep your answers simple, your face still. They take notes anyway. You try not to shiver. By evening, more names are whispered. The blacksmith's wife, the woman who hums to herself while she works, a boy who can't stop talking in his sleep. Fear is contagious. It travels faster than plague, and no one's immune. You start to rehearse your innocence in your head at night, like a prayer, in case you're ever asked to prove it. The wind outside howls harder now, pressing against the walls as if trying to get in. You lie awake listening to it, heart racing with each creak of the rafters. It sounds almost human sometimes, almost like a voice calling names. You pull the blanket tighter and whisper to yourself that it's just the wind, but you don't quite believe it. In the morning, you pass the square again. The ground is scorched, blackened in a rough circle, and the smell lingers, sweet and foul. Someone's already sweeping up the ashes like it's just another chore. Life doesn't stop for horror anymore. It just folds it in, room for it. You keep walking, head down, eyes on your boots, pretending not to see the gray smear of footprints leading away from where the fire was. The wind picks up behind you, and for a moment it feels like it's whispering your name. You walk faster, your breath sharp in the air. You tell yourself it's only the weather, but deep down you know better. In a place where fear is law, even the air learns how to accuse. Royal decrees can't melt snow, but they keep trying anyway. Every few weeks, another parchment arrives, stamped in wax and carried by men in furs too fine for this weather. They ride through the slush with their heads high, voices bright and official, reading words no one believes anymore. The king commands that prices be fair, that grain be shared, that prayers be said more fervently. You stand in the square with the rest, listening, your breath fogging in the air, wondering if the parchment feels any warmer in their hands than it does in yours. The messenger's voice trembles toward the end. You can't tell if it's from the cold or the weight of absurdity. Everyone claps when he finishes because that's what you're supposed to do. But the sound is dull, flat, swallowed by the frost. The decree will be tacked to the church door by evening, fluttering in the wind like a dying leaf. Tomorrow it'll be stiff with ice. The king means well, or so they say. In the capital, they call this weather a temporary misfortune, as if winter has simply overstayed its welcome and needs a polite reminder to move along. Courtiers whisper about divine favor, about patience and endurance, about how the realm stands strong under His Majesty's wisdom. But the quarters eat indoors by roaring fires, while the peasants eat snow. You imagine their gloved hands, their gold goblets, their sermons about perseverance, and it makes you laugh, but not the good kind of laugh. The local lord has taken to issuing his own decrees, smaller echoes of the king's. He sends writers to inspect granaries, to collect tithes for the relief of the poor, though somehow the poor never see a crumb of it. You've stopped wondering where it all goes. The manor lights burn late into the night, and the smoke from its chimney smells suspiciously like meat. At the tavern, people talk politics with the same tone they use for weather. Resigned, grimly amused. Someone jokes that if the king truly wanted to help, he could command the sun to rise again. Someone else mutters that maybe he already tried. The laughter that follows is quick and nervous, the kind that ends with a glance toward the door. Treason has a way of echoing too loudly in these conditions. A rumor starts that the royal astrologers have predicted an end to the frost. Another says they found a comet to blame instead. A third claims the Pope himself has blessed the kingdom's fields from afar. Though the only thing that grows these days is hunger. You start to wonder if hope itself might be a kind of currency, hoarded, traded, and spent by those who can still afford the luxury of believing. When the next decree comes, it arrives with soldiers, not the polished kind from the city, but hard-eyed men wrapped in layers of leather and wool. They say they're here to keep order, though what they really do is count heads and search cellars. They check for hoarded grain, for hidden stores of dried meat, for anything that might explain why the village still hasn't starved completely. You keep your eyes low and your mouth shut while they look through your home. When they leave, you light a candle, not in thanks, but in warning. The priest reads the newest decree on Sunday. All able-bodied men are to help clear the roads for royal supply wagons. You stand there, hands numb, wondering what supplies there could possibly be left to move. But orders are orders, and the king's seal makes them holy. So you take your shovel and dig it into frozen mud until your shoulders ache, pretending it matters. The men beside you don't speak. The silence between shovels feels heavier than the earth itself. By dusk, the sky bleeds gray into black, and snow starts falling again, undoing hours of labor in minutes. Someone curses softly. Someone else laughs, a hollow sound swallowed by the wind. The road vanishes beneath a new layer of white, perfect and untouched, as if mocking the entire idea of authority. You look up, flakes melting against your face, and think of the king in his palace, staring out at the same snow from behind stained glass. You wonder if it looks different from there, if it looks like beauty instead of failure. When you finally head home, the decree hangs limp on the church door, corners stiff with frost. The wax seal has cracked. You run your fingers over the royal crest, half buried in ice, and think how fragile power looks when it's frozen. You almost feel sorry for him, the man who commands armies yet can't command the weather almost. Then the wind shifts cold and sharp, and you pull your coat tighter because sympathy doesn't keep you warm either. The wind hits like a god that's had enough of humans. It starts as a low groan in the distance, the kind of sound you mistake for thunder until the ground trembles and the air itself starts to move. You step outside just in time to see the trees bend like they're bowing to something invisible. The sky isn't gray anymore. It's a sickly green, the color of copper left too long in the rain. Birds wheel in frantic circles, screaming warnings no one can understand. You've felt storms before. You've seen roofs ripped off, rivers spill their banks, and lightning split the night. But this feels different. This isn't weather. This is judgment. The first gust hits hard enough to knock you sideways. It tears the hat clean off your head and sends it tumbling into the void. You can't hear anything now except the roar, a sound too big to be sound at all. It's not just in your ears, it's in your chest, your teeth, your bones. You try to shout something to the others, but your voice disappears before it leaves your mouth. The village changes shape before your eyes. The wind tears through it like it's made of paper and pride. Thatched roofs lift whole, spinning through the air like startled birds. Chimneys collapse, walls buckle, carts roll uphill. The church bell starts ringing on its own, swinging wild and frenzied, as if the building's trying to warn the heavens instead of the earth. You run not away because there's nowhere to go but toward the only thing still standing, the stone granary by the hill. Others are doing the same, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. The wind doesn't care. It picks up one of the smaller huts and drops it in the street like a toy. A child screams, and you can't tell where it comes from, only that it cuts through everything for half a second before the storm swallows it again. When you reach the granary door, your hands barely work. You push inside along with half the village. Bodies pressed tight in the dark. The air is thick with breath and fear. Someone prays aloud, though the words sound small and desperate. The old man beside you mutters something about God's wrath, about how the sea's been rising too far, too fast, You want to tell him it's not the sea, it's the sky this time, but he wouldn't hear you anyway. Outside, the storm grows louder. The sound is no longer just wind, it's wood snapping, glass shattering, the grinding roar of stone dragged against stone. The walls shudder like a living thing. Grain sacks burst open, and the air fills with dust that stings your throat. You close your eyes and wait for the building to give way, but somehow it doesn't. Hours pass, or maybe minutes. Time bends here. The only clock is the rhythm of the wind, the steady thud of your own heart against your ribs. When the door bursts open, a man stumbles in, soaked in bleeding, shouting about the coast. You catch fragments between his gasps. Gone. The whole harbor. Nothing left but foam. Someone starts crying. Someone else laughs. A thin, hysterical sound that doesn't stop until another voice tells them to. Eventually, the roaring begins to fade. Not stop, but weaken as if the storm has finally had its fill. You push the door open and step into a world that doesn't look like the one you knew. The air smells of salt and broken things. The sky is still moving, streaming with bruised colors. Where the houses once stood are piles of timber and stone, flattened like toys under a careless hand. You walk to where the river used to meet the sea and find it's all one now. A vast sheet of gray water stretching far inland. Boats are lodged in trees. Fish lie scattered across the fields, glinting like coins tossed by a cruel god. The church tower is gone. The bell lies half buried in mud, still humming faintly when the wind touches it. You stand there soaked and trembling, listening to what's left of the storm move away toward the horizon. For a moment, it almost sounds like laughter. You tell yourself it's just the wind, but deep down you can't shake the feeling that the world has finally said something back, and it wasn't sorry. You find beauty in frost patterns because that's all that's left to admire. They spread across the window at dawn like ghostly vines curling into shapes that almost look deliberate. You trace them with your finger, careful not to melt them too fast, and pretend they're messages left behind by the world before it went numb. The glass hums faintly with the cold. You can see your breath on the other side, and it feels like you're both a prisoner and witness to some quiet kind of art. The mornings are the worst, but also the most beautiful. The world outside glitters with a sharp, merciless light. Every rooftop wears a crown of ice. Every branch carries glass leaves that chime faintly when the wind moves through them. The fields stretch out in white silence, and for a brief moment, it almost looks like peace. But you know better. You know the sound of stillness when it's made of hunger. You start noticing how the cold paints differently each day. Some mornings it carves straight lines, delicate as lace. Others it scrawls chaos, fractures racing outward from the edges, sharp and jagged like a cracked mirror. You find yourself staring longer than you should, studying how the frost creeps, how it grows. It feels alive, patient, and strangely confident in its purpose. When you were younger, art meant tapestries in the manor, saints in stained glass, or paintings of kings who never looked cold. Now, art is the way the ice climbs the walls, or how the light bends through icicles like glass cathedrals. You catch yourself smiling at it sometimes, this strange frozen beauty that doesn't need permission to exist. It's the only thing left that isn't trying to survive. It's just there, indifferent and perfect. The village painter, what's left of him, still works, though no one's buying portraits anymore. The walls are gray, the fire too weak to cast real warmth. You pin bits of dried fabric above the hearth, faded reds and golds from a time when people thought the future was something you could decorate. They don't look like much, but in the dim light, they glow faintly, and that's enough. You catch yourself thinking that maybe art doesn't die with the world, it just changes its medium. Sometimes you carve shapes into the frost before it melts. Little things, spirals, stars, the rough O's in soft, tired curls. You pass the chapel and see the frost crawling up its windows, swallowing the stained glass saints one pane at a time. The candlelight inside flickers weakly behind the ice. And for once you think it's beautiful, not holy, not tragic, just honest. You stop near the well and look at your reflection on the frozen surface. The frost has drawn a web across it, distorting your face until it looks almost unfamiliar. You tilt your head, studying it like a painting. I'm grateful for it. Not for the suffering, but for the beauty it still allows. Even now, when everything else has stopped growing, the frost keeps creating delicate, impermanent, endlessly new. And you sit there, half freezing, half awed, thinking that maybe that's all art ever was. A way of pretending the end could still be beautiful. You wake before dawn to the sound of silence. A silence so complete it feels heavier than noise. When you step outside, the world is blue and brie rises like smoke from extinguished candles. One of them, Brother Henry, the oldest, stops and lifts a frozen cluster in his hand. It crackles faintly. The grapes inside are solid as stones. God tests, he says quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Always, he tests. But his eyes look tired and his hands don't stop shaking. You remember when this place smelled of sweetness and yeast? When barrels lined the cloister, bees drifted lazy in the late heat. Wine was their pride. They helped them anyway. Because there's nothing else to do, and because the sound of hammering feels almost alive. The blows echo against the stone walls like heartbeats, like reminders that the world hasn't completely stopped yet. Later, you find Brother Muccio near the chapel, staring at the sky as if he expects an answer. Perhaps, he says, we've been praying for the wrong drink. His smile is thin, nearly invisible under his hood. Maybe God's taken a liking to ale or mead or some art of man. The words sound absurd now, like fragments from another species, but no one interrupts him. It's better to pretend for a moment that such warmth once existed. Afterward, you follow Brother Henry back to the vineyard. The moonlight turns the fields into silver rivers. He kneels in the snow and presses his palm flat against the frozen ground. It's all still here, he murmurs, sleeping, not dead. You want to believe him. You kneel, too. And for a brief second, the colds of snow skimming across the frozen soil. Back in the cloister, the monks gather to pray, their voices blending into something that sounds less like faith and more like endurance. You stand at the edge of the candlelight, listening. The flames flicker wildly, fighting for air, and the wax drips like slow tears. When the chant ends, no one moves right away. It's as if they're waiting for God to acknowledge the effort. Outside, the frost creeps higher up the walls, delicate like he's walked out of the end of the world. His beard is frosted white, not with age, but with ice, and his eyes have that hollow brightness that only comes from too much wind and too little hope. He says the north is moving, retreating, really shrinking under a sky that no longer forgives. Whole villages have packed what they can and started walking south. You picture it immediately. Families trailing across the snow, smoke fading behind them. The wind erased their footprints before the coast. There's no real plan, just the shared understanding that south means survival. The roads are packed with people, wrapped in layers of everything they own, dragging carts that squeal in protest. Some walk with animals, others with nothing. A few carry icons and crosses, though no one's sure whether God is north, south, or watching from somewhere far colder. At night, the travelers huddle together around stuttering fires. The air smells of smoke and wet wool. You hear stories of trade kept coming back. We burned the docks for warmth. The sea burned. You try to imagine the sight of fire on frozen water, and it makes you feel smaller than ever. By day, the world is endless white. By night, it's endless dark. You start to lose sense of time. Meals blur into trudging, trudging into sleep, sleep into more cold. You find yourself counting breaths, steps, stars, anything to keep your mind tethered. The cold isn't just outside anymore, it lives under your skin. A cue, the snow is waist deep, and the wind screams like something alive. The leader, a broad man with a voice that's half command, half exhaustion, orders everyone to wait it out. You build shelters from what little you have. Overturned carts, animal hides, the brittle remains of fences. You curl inside your cloak and listen to the wind claw at the fabric. It feels like being inside a throat, swallowed whole by the storm. When morning comes, the wind has calmed, but the landscape is stepping into a half-forgotten dream. The people there look at you with wary pity, offering bread in disbelief. You overhear one of them whisper, "They've come from the edge." You don't correct her. The edge isn't a place anymore. It's a condition. That night, as you lie near a hearth for the first time in weeks, you listen to the timbers creak under the strain of the frost. You know the north isn't done moving yet. It's coming inch by inch, village by village. And when it starts, sweet and heavy, like rot wrapped in wet wool, that's when people begin whispering again. You've gotten used to whispers by now. For years they've been about the weather, about sin, about who's hoarding grain, or who might secretly be a witch. But this time, the whispers have a new edge, a sharper one. It starts with travelers bringing word of a sickness sweeping through port cities. Genoa, Marseille, Lubeck. They say it rides in with the ships tucked between bales of cloth, and it. That's what everyone says. Disease needs warmth, needs life. But somehow the plague thrives in the frost, feeding on hunger and fear like it was born for this. You start to notice how quiet the nights have become. Not peaceful, quiet, but hollow, as if even sound is avoiding the place. The bells toll more often now, not for worship, but warning. One morning, you pass the baker's house and find the door wide open. Inside, the air is still. The loaves on the table are half cut, a knife that seems thinner every day. You start to think faith might be the only thing spreading faster than the sickness. You learn to recognize the signs before they say it aloud. A cart left outside too long. A shutter nailed shut. Smoke rising from the edge of the village. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of movement behind boarded windows. Hands pale and desperate, scratching at the cracks. You keep walking. Everyone does. There's no cruelty in it anymore. Just survival. By the time the rats maw. The priest disappears one morning and doesn't come back. Even the bell ringer falls silent. When the wind shifts, it carries the smell of the pets from the next village over. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your tongue. You start to think it might never leave. And yet somehow, life keeps pretending. Someone still sells bread. Someone still lights candles in the chapel, though no one dares go inside. You catch yourself staring at the frost on the windows again, at how it's still manna. It's something that's moved in for good. You've forgotten what fullness feels like. It's been so long since you've eaten to satisfaction that hunger doesn't even feel like pain anymore. It's just a steady background hum like the ringing in your ears after church bells. The world has become thin, literally and otherwise. Fields that once waved green now lie gray and stiff beneath frost. The ground refuses to open as if it's tired of giving. The children don't remember what ripe for you to expect. Memory, you realize, has gone hungry too. The days are short and mean. You wake before dawn because sleep feels wasteful. Because every hour of light must be used, though no one really knows for what anymore. You tend to the earth out of habit more than hope, scratching at frozen soil with tools dull from years of overuse. The wind stings your hands, your eyes, your pride. You used to curse it. Now you just work around it. There's no energy left for anger. In the hour, music spilling out of tavern doors, the smell of roasted meat in the streets. Now the taverns have gone dark, its signs swinging loose in the wind. No one sings anymore, at least not songs you'd recognize. The tunes now are low and shapeless, murmured work songs meant to keep rhythm when your body wants to quit. Sometimes you think the world itself has grown lighter, like it's shedding pieces of itself to survive. People, too. The old die quietly in their sleep, and no one has burning wood makes your stomach tighten because everything smells like food. Now at night, the frost forms on the inside of your windows, delicate and cruel. You trace patterns in it with your finger, the way children used to draw on fresh snow. Once it might have been fun, now it's just something to do with hands that won't stop shaking. You dream of color, green fields, red apples, yellow light. You wake with the taste of dirt on your tongue and the shape of a sun you barely remember, apples still hanging on, frozen solid. You pluck it down, turn it over in your palm, and for a moment you think you can smell it, sweet, sharp, alive. You close your eyes and breathe it in slowly and carefully, trying to remember what it meant to be full, not just of food, but of everything. When you open your eyes, the apple is gone, already melting back into the snow. It begins with a breeze that doesn't sting. For the first time in years, the air feels like something you can breathe with the risk. The baker opens his shutters again, though there's barely any flour left to work with. Children run through the fields barefoot, shrieking as if laughter alone can thaw the world. You hear someone call it a sign from God, a blessing. You don't argue, you want to believe it too. Everywhere, smells of damp earth and smoke. The rivers swell with meltwater, the kind that carries entire branches downstream, sometimes whole trees. The monks in the chapel ring the bell's riage of repairing the old inn. Someone starts brewing ale from leftover barley, weak but drinkable. For the first time in years, people smile when they talk about tomorrow. You almost forget how easily hope turns to habit. The warm days stretch long and soft. Even the animals seem confused by it. Cows grazing lazily where the frost once gnawed their hooves. You wake early each morning to light so golden it feels unreal, as if it's borrowed from another century. The priest sick and gray as old wool. The light flattens. The birds go quiet. When rain finally falls, it's not the gentle kind that nourishes. It's heavy and relentless, pounding the soil until puddles merge into pools. The fields flood within days. The green fades to brown, then to black. You watch the grain bend under the weight and of water, bowing low until it doesn't rise again. The air smells of rot and iron. The laughter dies faster than the crops. The baker shuts his windows. The priest is a kage. A few villagers talk about moving again, chasing warmth as if it's a thing you can catch. You don't stop them. When night falls, the wind returns in earnest. It rattles shutters, slips through every crack like an old friend comes to visit. You wrap yourself in layers and sit by the fire. What little of it you can keep. The wood hisses, damp from the rain. Outside, the last of the warmth bleeds away, carried off by the same sky that gave it. You think about that first soft breeze, unbroken, stretching farther than your eyes can follow. Ships that once bobbed in the water like restless beasts are now trapped mid-motion, frozen in place, sails drooping like the wings of fallen birds. The ropes creak sometimes in the wind, but otherwise everything just waits. You remember when the harbor was the heartbeat of the city? Masts crowding the skyline, voices shouting over the clatter of crates, the smell of salt and fish and money mixing into something you could almost dar, rather than empires, older than trades and treaties and ships with fancy crests. It simply decides one day to stop cooperating, and the world rearranges itself around that decision. The taverns near the docks are empty now, their signs swinging in the wind like tired flags. Once sailors filled them with noise and lies and songs from every corner of the map. You used to drink there too, just to feel the pulse of something bigger than yourself. Now the only sound inside is to sell a fur coat that's older than she is. No one can afford it. A boy offers candles that barely hold a flame. You buy one anyway, just to see his face change, even if only for a second. At night, you walk down to the edge of the ice. It's quiet in a way that feels wrong, like the world has been muted. The moonlight stretches across the frozen surface, silver and cold, reflecting the masts of the trapped ships like gravestones. You can hear the faint groans of the ice shifting. Expand is suicide, but leaving feels worse, like admitting defeat to something you can't even touch. News travels slower now. Letters freeze in the saddlebags of couriers who never make it through. Rumors say kings have lost fleets, that trade routes are collapsing, that towns farther north have vanished entirely. The empires that once bragged about their reach are learning the same lesson as everyone else. You can't rule what doesn't move. You stay home because there's nowhere else to go. You listen until the sound fades, until all that's left is the creak of the house in your own slow breathing. In the distance, you can still see the frozen masts standing against the pale sky, proud and useless. You wonder how long they'll stay like that, half memory, half monument, until the thaw comes, if it ever does. The cold doesn't kill quickly. It just teaches you how to live smaller, quieter, until even endurance feels like surrender. You can see the prayers now. They rise and feels like stepping into the lungs of a frozen god. The masons left their tools behind when the weather turned. Chisels still rest where hands once were. Iron hammers half buried in ice. Someone has draped a cloth over a half-carved statue of a saint, though the fabric has stiffened into something closer to stone. The unfinished faces look patient, almost amused, as if they understand that eternity doesn't mind delays. Faith, after all, has always been a long game. The priest ice. When they ring, the sound is strange, muted, almost apologetic. The town gathers anyway, huddled together under the open roof of heaven and architecture, waiting for a sign that hasn't come in years. You can't help but think how strange it is that people still look upward when the cold always comes from above. When Mass ends, no one rushes out. People linger near the entrance, rubbing hands together, trading rumors disguised as revelations. One woman swears she saw forgiveness, like everything else, feels delayed by the weather. Outside, the graveyard lies in silence. The crosses are capped with snow, names buried under layers of white anonymity. Someone has placed a single candle at the base of one stone, its flame barely clinging to life. You kneel beside it, shielding it with your hands, and wonder if this is what prayer has always been, just trying to keep something small and trembling alive against the wind. The city beyond the cathedral has Elling. The cathedral scaffolding looks like a cage of bones. The bells are silent. The priest's footprints are the only ones leading to the door. You follow them inside, where the air feels heavier, as if the cold itself has joined the congregation. The candles have burned down to stubs. Their wicks glow faintly, fighting for one more breath. You stand there a long time, watching the light flicker across the unfinished stone, catching the faces of saints and angels who never got their win right into your nets, and the sea singing lullabies to everyone within earshot. But now the water's gone gray and restless, and the wind that once smelled of rosemary and citrus carries only the scent of cold stone and disappointment. Even the Mediterranean, it seems, has started to shiver. You walk the groves at dawn when the frost still clings to the soil. The olive trees look like wounded branches drooping, fruit shriveled and black before their time. They crunch underfoot like they forgot to destroy. The oil that comes from it smells off sharp, sour, like it's mourning the fruit it could have been. The merchants wrinkle their noses, offer half the usual price, then half again. You take it anyway. Pride, like everything else, doesn't keep you warm. In the villages by the coast, the fishermen drag in nets of near nothing. The sea has changed its mood, currents colder, fish fewer waves breaking harder against the rocks. Boats come back, battered sails, frozen stiff me. How the Nile floods less each year. You notice the way everyone talks about warmth, as if it's a person who left without saying goodbye. The church bells still ring on Sundays, though fewer come to listen. The priest preaches about endurance, about how the Lord sends trials to the strong. You can't help but notice his hands shaking as he lifts the chalice. Even the wine in it looks watered down when he blesses the congregation. You can see his breath cloud in the air. Holiness, ale in your face. You take shelter in the press house with a few others, huddled around a weak fire that smells of wet smoke. Outside, the wind screams through the olive branches, rattling shutters and shaking the rafters. You watch the flames flicker, thinking how much they look like memory. Bright, trembling, always on the edge of vanishing. When the storm finally passes, you step outside to find the groves littered with fallen branches, the air sharp and silent. The horizon, we take comfort in that small persistence, even as your hands shake from the chill. Maybe that's all survival really is. Continuing the motion, even when the warmth that once made it worth it has long since gone. It starts with a sound you almost don't notice. The creak of frost returns to the corners of windows, the whisper of the wind turning sharper. The air smells cleaner, colder, as if the world is taking a deep breath before holding it again. The warmth had lingered and quite recovered from the last frost, and now surrendered completely. People don't talk about it at first. They've learned that words can make things real. The market still opens, though the stalls are half empty, and the baker still insists this winter will pass quickly, as if saying it makes it true. The blacksmith keeps his forge burning day and night, mostly for warmth, though he tells anyone who asks that he's preparing for orders. Orders for what? No one knows. Within us, we feel less cruel, but it never comes. The sun hovers low, colorless and cold, offering light without warmth, like a lantern hanging in a dead world. The snow doesn't fall so much as it accumulates quietly, steadily, until everything you once recognized is buried beneath it. Inside, you ration firewood. Every spark feels expensive. The walls crack under the weight of the cold, and your breath fogs the room like ghosts have moved in. You wear every layer you own, and still the chill finds its ooh. Once you find an old coin while digging through the shed, tarnished, stamped with the face of a king who probably froze long before you were born. You turn it over in your hands, feeling its weight. A relic from a time when people thought they could command nature with crowns and decrees. Now kings are as powerless as farmers. Ice doesn't kneel. The animals go quiet first. Then the trees start cracking under their own weight, snapping in the distance like thunder. You stand outside the realm of green fields, of water running freely, of a breeze that smells like earth instead of iron. You wake up crying, though your tears freeze before they hit the pillow. Outside, the snow glows under the moonlight, endless and unbroken. You sit by the dying fire until the last ember fades, until the shadows swallow the room whole. The cold presses in again, steady and familiar. It feels like coming home to something you never escaped, only postponed. You pull your cloak tig expecting to be full, somewhere between the last loaf of bread and the first thaw that never came. You just started surviving on less food, less warmth, less certainty. You learn tricks. You boil the bark until it softens. Shave off the bitter layers and chew slowly, pretending the taste reminds you of something better. You crush acorns, wash them again and again to chase the bitterness out, though it never truly leaves. You eat moss once just to see if you can. You can. You don't know why your boots now have more holes than leather, but somehow still count as shoes. Or how the chickens, long dead, still manage to haunt the coop every time the wind blows through the empty rafters. You and your neighbor make a game of it. Spot the smallest victory of the day. The firewood didn't smoke me out this time. My fingers thawed before my nose froze. The rats haven't come back since the cat disappeared, so maybe he won that one. You laugh until you cough, and you keep laughing about food. The way cheese used to taste, the smell of fresh bread, the crisp edge of an apple in summer. It becomes a ritual, a shared hallucination that feeds everyone more than bark ever could. Sometimes someone throws in a lie, a feast that never happened, a recipe made of nonsense, and everyone plays along, nodding solemnly as if they've tasted it too, pretending it turns out to be its own form of survival. The children are the best at it. They run through the snow, faces geese. What matters? What doesn't? You realize you don't need comfort anymore. You just need the next dawn. When morning comes, you do what everyone does. You stretch your hands toward the fire, no matter how small it's gotten. You chew your bark and call it breakfast. You share a joke that's older than the hunger itself. And somehow, through the sheer stubborn weight of repetition, it becomes enough. You never planned to be good at surviving, but you are. You've learned the bala now will give it names, chart it in books, and argue about causes in rooms that never feel the cold. You just call it life. You wake before dawn because everyone does. The dark isn't something to fear anymore. It's simply where the day begins and ends. You break the ice in the bucket, light the fire with kindling that smokes more than it burns, and stare into the weak flame until it convinces you it's enough. The house smells of wet wool and ash. Your hands are cracked, your lips split. You hear the scholars in the city are taking notes on the weather now, writing down how long the snow lasts, how the crops fail, how the frost creeps farther south each year. They measure suffering in numbers. Try to tame it with ink and parchment. They call it observation. You call it surviving. A record won't keep anyone warm. Still, part of you admires their stubbornness. Maybe writing it down makes it less monstrous. The way naming a wolf makes it less terrifying in the dark, completely. You stand outside and feel the sunlight on your face, thin as it is, and you remember what warmth once felt like. You try to hold it in your skin, in your bones, but it always slips away. Still, you can't help but smile. Maybe that's the real miracle. Not the return of the sun, but your ability to keep caring when it does. You notice things others have stopped noticing. The way the frost forms delicate veins on windows, like the world is sketching its own sadness. The sound you understand is chaotic. Maybe that's what keeps people alive. The illusion that endurance means control. At night, you sit by the fading fire and think about the people who will come after. You imagine them standing in their warm houses, studying the past, shaking their heads at how hard life once was. You hope they never learn what it means to wait for a thaw that doesn't come. You also know they probably will. The world has a way of teaching the same lessons in dim-lit light, but it's really something closer to surrender. You know that look. Everyone does now. It's the look of a world trying to remember what warmth felt like and failing. The artists come anyway, dragging their easels and pigments through snow that swallows their boots, setting up in frozen courtyards and churchyards, their fingers stiff, their breath clouding over their work. They paint not because they believe in beauty, but because they can't bear not to. You pass on 7 walls covered with sketches, small charcoal portraits of people who paid in smiles instead of coins. Some are already dead, others long gone south, chasing warmer air. The drawings remain, eyes wide and weary, mouths soft with resignation. You recognize the expression because you wear it too. It's not despair exactly, but something quieter, like you've made peace with it hanging over your shoulder. Outside, the cold paints its own masterpieces. Frost climbs the windows in Pimes. Her saints end up looking more like tired farmers than holy figures. But people love them. They say her faces feel real, like the ones who listen instead of preach. You buy one once, not out of faith, but because the expression feels familiar. It's the look of someone enduring with quiet dignity, which is really the only kind of holiness anyone can afford. Now, there's humor in it too, if you squint. Painters start arguing over who can make snow look more honest. They compete over yet. You catch your reflection in the icy water one morning and realize you've become part of the same composition. The gray light, the hollow cheeks, the quiet persistence. You almost wish someone would paint you just to prove you existed in this strange, suspended age. The church commissioned a grand piece for the altar, a mural of the Last Judgment. Though everyone jokes that maybe it's just a weather forecast, the painter works in the cold until his fingers bleed. Same member. When morning comes, the world looks the same gray, still endless, but you notice new patterns in the frost. Tiny swirls shaped like wings or leaves, or maybe just the suggestion of them. You can almost imagine spring hiding beneath it, waiting its turn. You smile just barely. You've learned to find beauty the way painters do now, not in what's alive, but in what refuses to die quietly. You think it's finally easing. The frost breaks in April. Rivers stir, and the air smells. Arrives, and the sky turns gray again. Not the gentle gray of spring rain, but the heavy ash-cooled kind that looks borrowed from another planet. The air grows still, thick, waiting. You wake one morning to find the ground white, not frost. You tell yourself, maybe just an early dew. But when you step outside, it crunches beneath your boots. The plants you coaxed into life lie flat, wilted, and blackened, as if some invisible hand presses the breath out of them overnight. You know hovers like a dying flame. Word spreads in fragments. A volcano, they say, far across the world, Indonesia, or somewhere else you've only heard of in rumors. Tambora, the name rolls strangely on your tongue. Its eruption sent ash into the heavens, enough to dim the sun, enough to steal the seasons. It sounds like a story meant to explain suffering, but this one's real. You picture fire on one side of the world and ice on the other. And for a moment it almost feels balanced. Poetic ifsis, it's not so bad. It is. The cold stretches on month after month. Snow falls in August. Ice clings to wells in September. You count the harvest by what hasn't died yet and store it in a corner like treasure. The priests hold mass outdoors, their voices muffled by wind. They tell everyone to pray harder, louder, as if volume could melt the air. Some listen, others stop showing up entirely. You start measuring time by what refuses to die. A single patch of green by the riverbank. A cow doesn't. It never really does. Years later, people will call it the year without a summer, as if it were an inconvenience, a season misplaced. They'll write about it in neat lines, measure it in temperatures and harvest counts. You'll remember it differently. You'll remember the sound of frost cracking like bones, the smell of smoke from fires too small to help, the taste of boiled roots, bitter and thin. You'll remember how the light looked that last day, cold, fragile, and so different, softer, somehow, less heavy. The window pane, once jeweled with frost, has wept itself clear overnight. A single drop slides down the glass, and you watch it as if it's a miracle, which in a way it is. You open the door, and the cold doesn't bite, it exhales. The wind smells faintly of mud and something else you haven't sensed in years. Life. The snow doesn't melt all at once. It thins in patches, dark veins of earth showing through like an old map rediscovering V in years. People stand outside for no reason other than to feel sunlight touch their faces. The light is still thin and pale, but it's honest. It makes everything look softer. The broken fences, the worn roofs, the faces that have aged 3 winters in one. Someone laughs. Not a sharp, desperate laugh like before, but a quiet one that floats and lingers. You don't even remember what was said, only that it feels like warmth made a sound. You walk past the fields and see the FG you used to know but forgot the melody of. Then come the foxes, the deer, the insects that hum in the corners of barns. Even the rats look less like omens now, and more like participants in the general act of survival. The tavern smells different too, less of smoke, more of yeast, and something faintly sweet. Someone managed to brew again, and the taste, though sharp and weak, burns in the right way. People linger longer by the fire, not because they need to, but because they want too many nights you could outlast the dark. Now the silence doesn't suffocate, it stretches. There's room in it again for imagination, for what-ifs. The church bells ring one morning, not for prayer, but for gratitude. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows what they're thinking. Not God, not kings, not fate, just time. Time, finally moving forward again. The ice breaking is not loud, it's a slow, splintering sigh that carries through the air and settles in your bones. You take a walk through fields, animals, laughter, and realize none of it was lost, only waiting. You close your eyes, inhale deeply, and for the first time in years, you don't taste ash, you taste